You hurry through the overpowering sights and smells in the travelling menagerie to get a good view of what you've come here to see. You make your way past the unimaginably exotic caged beasts you've been gawping at all evening. Wolves, hyenas, sloths, even giraffes. It doesn't sit quite right with you to see these wild creatures in cages, but right now, your curiosity overrides everything else. You see a crowd ahead. They're getting restless. You know these places have a reputation for getting rowdy, but when a travelling menagerie comes to your town, it's impossible to resist. You squeeze through the crowd and you catch sight of what you're looking for, the lion's cage. There he is, the powerful king of beasts, and in the den with him is a woman. It's Britain's famous lion queen, Nellie Chapman. She's moving around the cage masterfully, seeming to tame, almost enchant the lion who moves in response. The crowd becomes hushed, and the tension is palpable as the lion queen gets ready to perform the climax of her act. This brave young woman is about to put her head in the lion's jaws. You tense in excitement. You want to see the lion queen performing her famous piece, but it seems impossibly dangerous. There have been stories of these big cat acts going horribly wrong. The lion queen guides the lion to open its huge, powerful jaws. The crowd draws its breath. Hello and welcome to Beastly History with me, Michelle Douglas, wildlife producer and natural history superfan. This is the show where we uncover the most thrilling tales of people and the wild that ever there was. And in this episode, we're digging into the story of the Lion Queen. The Victorians are my absolute favourite because they were so extra, so unhinged, and their craving for the curious is something that I, and I dare to add lots of Beastly History listeners, can relate to. And one of the most popular curiosities for people in the 19th century was when the travelling menagerie came to town. And if exotic animals weren't enough, you might also get to see a daring lion taming act. So today we're uncovering the utterly fascinating story of Britain's most famous lion queen, Ellen or Nellie Chapman. Chapman's skills with big cats saw her rise from humble beginnings to fame and fortune with Britain's biggest menageries. She had courage, success, but at the peak of her powers, there was a shocking onstage incident that highlighted just how dangerous her world really was for animals and for people. We'll be joined by Dr. Peter Tate, a professor at La Trobe University in Australia and author of the book Fighting Nature, to uncover the story of the Lion Queen. What was life like for the animals in travelling menageries? What did big cat acts tell us about the Victorian psyche and attitude to the world? And could you have survived as a lion king or queen? Hello, Peter. Thank you so much for joining me. Can you tell me a little bit about you, what you do?
Well, I'm a university professor of theatre studies and based in Melbourne, Australia.
So Ellen Chapman, known as the Lion Queen. For people that might not have heard of Ellen Chapman, how would you introduce her?
Well, I'd have to say she was a performer. Ellen Chapman performed and became famous as a lion tamer in 1847. She was not the first lion queen, but she became the most well-known.
Ellen, or Nellie as she goes by, Chapman, has an unusual upbringing. Born in 1831 in Liverpool, she's brought up by the Manders family, who work for one of the 19th century's most prolific travelling menageries called Wombwell's. It's run by George Wombwell, a highly ambitious and at times ruthless man, driven to become an entertainment mogul with his sensational show and to make as much money as possible. We don't know loads about Chapman's origins. or how she began to work towards becoming a star attraction, but it's likely she doesn't have much access to traditional education. Instead, from an early age, she'd have been used to life on the road and would have worked around the animals. And it's likely she has the chance to get close to the big cats.
There's a possibility she and the other women in her family would have looked after the babies, because there was a sense that those little cubs were looked after by the performers and the business people. So she may have grown up with looking after the baby cubs and felt quite comfortable from that point of view. So in a sense, she grew into the act or came into it through her family.
Let's delve some more into the strange world of the travelling menagerie. They were atmospheric, visceral places. There was entertainment, spectacle, and there was also cruelty and edge. So why were they having such a big moment in 19th century society? Let's pan out for a minute to talk about menageries. What was a Victorian menagerie like?
There were menageries back in history. They were usually owned by aristocratic figures, so royalty. But the travelling menagerie went to where the audience was. So it was an opportunity for local people to come and see the animals that they wouldn't have seen before. Now, these menageries were made possible because of the colonial empires. So it was the increasing development of a large trade in animals out of the colonies in British and European empires. And it just grew in scale in the 19th century. Many animals did not actually survive the travel back to the imperial centres, but the trade was a growing one, an expanding one. And menageries offered a visual spectacle. The smell would have been strong. And so the whole experience was heightened sensory encounter. Menageries were not perhaps the safest places. It was, in a sense, a quite unruly, unregulated zone. So the local hooligans might turn up and have a fight. There were a lot of accounts of this kind of expressive aggression happening around the animals, as if the menagerie and its atmosphere somehow gave a license for that.
After years of attracting crowds with their animals in cages, menagerie business owners like George Wombwell are looking to keep things spicy so customers keep coming back. They find one way of doing this is to offer a show, putting people in the cage with the beasts. There are different kinds of events. For example, there's a hunting act, where actors fire a pistol and try to mimic chasing down the animals in the wild. And then there are the performances with the big cats. The most classic and risky is the Lion Tamer Act. The Lion Tamer Act is all about reinforcing the idea of humans' dominance over nature. And at first, the role is taken on by men only, known as Lion Kings. But after a few years, menageries are looking for yet more spice to entice the audience. Enter Lion Queens. These women add to the theatre of it all by tantalisingly twisting Victorian gender expectations. It works. The audience love it. It's 1846 at Wombwell's travelling menagerie. Ellen Chapman is about to enter the lion's den. At just 16 years old, she already has the experience needed to work with big cats. She's fearless, and as it turns out, a skilled performer. Can she help draw the crowds of paying customers to Wombwell's menagerie? What did the young Lion Queen's act involve?
She was working with Wombwell's travelling menagerie, using the stage name of Lady of the Lions, Madame de Vere. For a fee, the public could see her enter a small cage with lions and other big cats, reportedly that she also worked with tigers and leopards. Her technique seemed to have been to get them to react by moving around the cage. But she became famous because she was performing a trick that the men were doing, which was opening the lion's jaw and putting her head or her face near the jaw. And this was a particular technique where you held on to the muscles of the lion's jaw so it would stay open.
What do you think she would have been like? What do you think her character was like?
Well, I've thought about this, and she was young, but clearly she was courageous. She was observed to be quite calm, not to show nervousness with the animals, and that was probably quite important. She was quite tenacious, clearly.
Audiences are entranced by the young lion queen. Word gets around about the teenagers' command of these big cats, and the crowds get bigger and bigger. Ellen Chapman, stage name Madame Pauline de Vere, quickly begins making the menagerie a lot of money. Wombwell's is on its way to sealing its legacy as one of the biggest and best menageries of the era. That's important to its owner, showman George Wombwell, who's pulling the strings. George Wombwell's been fascinated by exotic animals for a young age, and especially their potential to make money. His turning point had come in the early 1800s when he visited the London docks as a young man and saw the arrival of two large boa constrictor snakes. He bought them, and these animals formed the start of Wombwell's travelling menagerie. By now, in the 1840s, he's in his 60s, and seeing the payoff of his ambitious, ruthless work to make his menagerie the biggest, most exotic collection of wild animals. Now he's cementing his legacy and showing he's still got more in the tank by promoting his new lion queen, establishing his status over his rivals. You mentioned Ellen Chapman working at Wombwell's Menagerie.
Yes.
So you do get these couple of menagerie businesses, these almost dynasties, which are very successful. Tell us about Wombwell's.
It was a very successful menagerie. It came to the fore in the 1820s. By the 1840s, it was a leading menagerie. So I thought I'd just give you a rundown. This is what it had on display. 13 lions, lionesses and cubs, a tiger and one tigress with cubs, leopards, a puma, a jaguar, a panther, a sloth, 3 elephants. Now that was you were lucky if you saw one usually. A rhinoceros, white antelope, and the newest additions with 3 giraffes. There were spotted hyenas, wolves, jackals, and a polar bear and black and brown bears. So the scale by 1840 was huge. It's hard to imagine how it was moved.
The popularity of menageries means the industry expands, and by the 1860s, there are 12 competitive businesses in the UK. But there's a growing tension and controversy surrounding the treatment of animals in menageries. Today, the conditions they were kept in would provoke a strong public retaliation. But in the 19th century, animal welfare regulation was in its infancy. Still, some people were concerned by what they saw.
If the spectator looked closely, there was unmistakable cruelty. And some animals did not survive very long in the menageries, sadly. They were very popular, but it might be possible to argue that this was not appealing to our better sentiments, but to our lower instincts. And in some ways, these animal exhibits were aggressive, socially regressive. And there were individuals who did complain about the cruelty and the sense of containment and recognised that the animals were often unhappy. So In defence, the menageries developed a justification where they claimed they were educating the public, and that was a big part of their promotion.
What was the general attitude at the time around animal cruelty? Was it just a few people who didn't like it, or is it something that was developing more in Victorian times, do you think?
In many ways, Britain led the movement to protect domestic animals from cruelty. So by 1824, there was legislation. In 1892, Henry Salt published a book called Animal Rights. And Henry Salt was very concerned about the treatment of animals in menageries and the fact they weren't being protected by legislation because they were exotic animals. So while it was popular business, there was also a counter narrative here where people resisted the practices that were going on in the menageries.
A few weeks ago, I took the family to my favourite day out, Longleat Safari. And the high point is where you get to drive through the lion enclosure. We were lucky enough to see the lions up close, and my goodness, they are ripped. These animals are muscled up to the max and watching everything with those amber eyes, completely in control. Even in the car, it gave us all a nervous thrill, and I checked the windows were shut more than once. I think it's good every now and again to remember that for all we've created, what puny physical specimens we actually are. For Victorian lion tamers, getting in a cage with these wild predators was obviously a highly dangerous career choice. And you won't be surprised to hear that sometimes the beasts fought back. There are a few reports over the years of things going very wrong. A number of handlers were attacked by animals, or big cats broke free and in a few instances killed people before being recaptured. And things could take a dangerous turn on stage. Being a lion tamer like Nellie Chapman was a very risky business. We'll hear more about just how risky later. Is 1847 and Nellie Chapman's star is rising. Just months into the role, her act is already very popular. She started bringing a lot of money into Wombwell's menagerie, and now Chapman's caught the eye of someone important. Queen Victoria herself has got wind of the Lion Queen and wants to see her perform. She's making a name for herself. And one incident in August 1847 brings her special attention. Wombwell's menagerie is travelling to the town of Folkestone. It's nighttime. The visibility is poor. The caravan containing the animals is travelling along a hilly road. When suddenly, one of the caravans slips down the embankment and overturns. Of course, it's the vehicle with the leopards in it. The big cats escape. It's a deadly situation. If the disorientated loose leopards reach the town filled with people, things could end up very badly for the public, the animals, and of course, the business. Nellie Chapman springs into action. She quickly and expertly handles the leopards, bringing them back to the caravan and keeping them calm. Tragedy averted. When the press get hold of the story, they marvel over the courage and physical strength of the slight young heroine. The fact Nellie Chapman was a young female who daringly handled powerful beasts generated a lot of intrigue with the public. How did lion queens disrupt the rigid way Victorian society viewed gender?
These women regularly contravened gender norms in the society. And particularly in this type of performance. So she was, in a sense, displaying what was considered a masculine attribute, the strength and the courage to go into a cage of lions, rather than what was considered feminine, which was timidity and weakness. So here she is taking on masculine values in a sense. So that was a kind of very subtle message for women. But it's worth noting she was billed as Madam, not Miss. And that's quite important because there was a sense that a married woman could get away with more license, more gender nonconformity than perhaps a young unmarried woman. Performers had some license because they often worked in a kind of fantasy that set them aside from social reality. But even so, this was quite a blatant challenge to the values that were dominant at that time.
It's October 1847. Nellie Chapman is going through her lion taming act. She's moving the big cats around the cage, so it appears they're controlled by her power. Although Chapman prides herself for her steely nerves and ease with the lions, she's feeling anxious. Because today's the day she's performing in the Windsor Castle courtyard by invitation of the royal family. And watching the show is Queen Victoria herself, Prince Albert, and their family. Chapman reaches the climax of her act. She lowers her head to place it inside the lion's mouth. Chapman's heart is beating quickly. She knows how much is riding on this performance going well. Impressing the extremely influential royal family would mean Wombwell cements its place as Britain's most esteemed travelling menagerie. And for Chapman, it could take her fame, fortune and legacy to new heights. Chapman completes her act. It seems to have gone well, but what did Queen Victoria think? After the show, Queen Victoria has waited to meet the Lion Queen. The reigning monarch gives Chapman a gold watch and chain and says, "Oh, my dear, are you not afraid? I do hope you will not get hurt. I felt so terrified when I saw you open the lion's mouth and put your head in its jaws." To which Chapman replies she was more nervous about meeting the Queen than entering the lion's cage. Following the success of the royal performance, Chapman does indeed reach new heights of fame. Author Charles Dickens writes about her feats, and ceramic producers and painters even feature her surrounded by big cats in their work. In just 2 years doing the lion taming act, Ellen Chapman becomes Britain's most celebrated lion queen. Then Nellie Chapman does something off stage that changes the course of this story. She decides to get married. The man in question is George Sanger. The name Sanger would go on to become very well known. For now, this young man is extremely entrepreneurial and he's got ambitions to build his own travelling menagerie business to rival Wombwell's.
They were quite young and he was an up-and-coming showman, and he claims in his autobiography that she turned up to see him at a fair in a conjuring act where he was dressed up in a Elizabethan type costume, with ruffles, and probably looked very glamorous. He was a conjurer, though, at this point. Now, I think he went to see her because she was much more famous than he was. So I doubt that account. They had known each other as children, so the families knew each other. So they were not unknown. He said she was the only girl for him.
Ellen Chapman is preparing to become a married woman. That means she'll be leaving Wombwell's to go and live and work with her husband, George Sanger. Chapman will continue the menagerie lifestyle, both as a wife and a worker, but she's going to give up the lion taming act and move on to other things. And so, at Wombwell's, a new lion queen is needed to replace Chapman. Chapman knows getting this handover right is crucial. The stakes are high. A successful new lion queen could keep growing Wombwell's menagerie's fame and fortune and keep the fans happy. But it's a dangerous job. If things go wrong, it could end in disaster. And things are about to go very wrong indeed. Wombwell selects the young woman to be Ellen Chapman's replacement lion queen. Her name is Ellen Blight. Blight is just 17 years old. It seems the teenager had already begun cutting her teeth as a performer at Wombwell's before she was asked to take on the role of the leading Lion Queen. There are few jobs in which you get quite such a baptism of fire as lion tamer. Pressure was immediately put on Blight when she was placed centre stage and her act promoted to the public. In January 1850, Blight's brand new in the Lion Queen role, only about 2 weeks in, for what happens next. Ellen Blight has finished her public performance for the night. The menagerie is settling down, but tonight Blight's fitting in one more show at the request of a group of soldiers who've come to see her daring big cat taming act. The small crowd watch Blight in the cage with awe and anticipation, enjoying the thrill of this very young woman controlling these powerful wild beasts. Blight makes her way around the den as usual. The big cats in the cage with her today are a lion and, watching warily, a tiger. Accounts vary of what happens next. One version is that after Blight has completed her tricks with the lion, the tiger moves in front of her only exit, which Blight hasn't expected. So she taps the animal with her whip, catching it on the nose. The tiger's wild instincts kick in at last. It swipes Blight on the leg, causing her to fall against the cage. Then the animal attacks, huge, sharp teeth at her throat. The crowd is horrified. Shouts and panic fill the air. Wombwell and attendants move in to beat the tiger off Ellen Blight. They force the tiger off the young woman using iron rods and pull her limp, bloody form off stage to rush her to a caravan. Despite desperate efforts, Ellen Blight is too badly injured to be saved, and minutes after the tiger attack, she dies.
Sadly, I would have to say that poor Ellen was very unfortunate in the circumstances. And it could be that she tried to do what Ellen had done, but she hadn't had the exposure to the animals. They didn't know her as well. And the tiger could have just been spooked by someone outside the cage. It's hard to know.
The tragic incident of a tiger killing Ellen Blight caused public shock and put menageries and their practices under the spotlight. Years after the event, Chapman's husband, George Sanger, wrote about the tragedy and tried to distance himself and Chapman from what happened. According to Sanger, Ellen Blight had used a whip to train the big cats, something enlightened trainers like he and Chapman frowned upon. But by the time Sanger was writing this at the end of the 19th century, he had the benefit of hindsight. Animal training had changed from the raw taming act to practiced performances where people didn't touch the animals.
It was a very different world by the end of the century. So accusing poor Helen Blight of not working properly and not paying attention to the animals was probably really unfair.
At the time, the incident sparks a backlash against lion queens. Some campaigners want to try to ban women from performing as lion tamers, and the industry comes under a lot of scrutiny. Yet, travelling menageries still thrive for some time after, despite the obvious dangers to both animals and people. It's 1871. More than 20 years have passed. Nellie Chapman is once again performing with a lion, but in a different kind of role. She and the lion are sitting on top of a carriage. They're passing by huge crowds lining the streets around St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Chapman sits proudly and imperiously next to the wild beast. She's dressed as Britannia, the symbolic woman representing her country Britain, complete with shield and trident. The scene is part of a royal procession to give thanks for the Prince of Wales' recovery from illness. So what happened to Chapman since we left her? Ellen Chapman marries George Sanger around 1850. And after 2 years of performing as a lion queen, during which she'd become famous and made a lot of money, she largely gives up the lion taming act. Instead, Chapman becomes instrumental in the success of the Sanger business. Over the next decades, the couple grow a travelling circus started by George Sanger and his brother John. Chapman's husband, George Sanger, is a larger-than-life character. He gives himself the title Lord Sanger, and his and Chapman's ambitions and skills as performers see Sanger's circus empire grow and grow. Chapman may have been out of the lion cage, but she still performs in other circus acts, like equestrian shows, dancing, taking on lots of different characters, and holds an important role running the business. Sanger's circus goes on to employ hundreds of people and becomes one of the UK's most famous and successful circuses of all time. Circus is a high-risk business, but the Sangers earn themselves a fortune. Chapman is also a mum. She has 3 children, but her son dies in infancy. Her 2 daughters, Lorena and Sarah Harriet, grow up in the circus. They're parents to 2 of Britain's best-known show and business people. What's the legacy of the inimitable Nellie Chapman, Britain's Lion Queen? What do you think Ellen Chapman's legacy is? What do you think she symbolises for you when you researched her?
She was an exceptional person in her own time within the constraints of the family business and the world that was around her. So, in a sense, she was part of that plucky, extraordinary, courageous approach to her life at that time.
Ellen Chapman worked through the decades when travelling menageries and the public curiosity and appetite for this kind of event was at its peak. So what happened to this Victorian brand of entertainment? Menageries seems to have gone out of fashion. When did they become less popular, and do we see any element of the menagerie still today?
They did go out of fashion. The zoo itself took precedence, so that, in a sense, took over the role of the travelling menagerie. We would now see zoos as having a licence to specialise in animals. So the whole role of where the zoos changed from its legacy of just exhibiting and money-making is now to, we would see as a much more caring and concerned role in the 21st century. I was a bit horrified at the popularisation of the staging of aggression between human and animals as entertainment, and that animal acts in the 19th century confirmed beliefs that humans had a right to dominate animals and to train them out of their species-specific behaviours. And this went into the popular imagination. And I recognised that people were living within the constraints of their economic world, but the scale of the trading of animals was incredibly upsetting. And the attitude that we had at that time is still prevalent. The idea that somehow land that was habitat and obviously belonged to Indigenous peoples could be co-opted and taken over in warlike behaviour, not just to the humans, but also to the animals. So I think these values have to be questioned, our cultural legacy of these values, and of course resisted. So that would be my perspective on that.
Thank you so much, Peter, for coming on to Beastly History. It's been fascinating and a pleasure.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Dressed as Britannia next to a lion, which, thankfully in the busy streets of London, is sitting next to her calmly, Chapman's not in the cage, but up high, where she has the view of thousands of upturned faces of people who've come to see the royal procession, and especially the extraordinary sight of the Lion Queen. It's time for top takeaways. I think one thing that I learned from researching this story is that it's a real example of our changing attitudes towards conservation in animals. I do find the strange, edgy, dark, atmospheric world of Victorian menageries to be absolutely fascinating, but these places were obviously very cruel for the animals, and it was all for people's entertainment. And then this bizarre idea to have a show where you're placing humans above nature and controlling the animals and just making sure that everyone can see our place in the world. And so I do have a lot of hope that now we've got a lot of conservation issues. I know it can feel overwhelming, but it does make you realise that most people's understanding is that we need to protect and care. We know it's not human versus nature. We're all living in the same home. And then, of course, there's Nellie Chapman herself. I have to admire her as a person because she is so badass. She was just so unfazed by society and expectations of her class and her gender, and she just went for it, didn't care what people thought, and they couldn't argue because who else is going to stick their head in a lion's mouth, quite frankly. So, boy, did Nellie Chapman know how to draw a crowd. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Beastly History. Do check out Dr. Peter Tate's book, Fighting Nature. Beastly History is written and produced by me, Michelle Douglas, and it's an independent production here at Wild Beast Studios. Thank you so much for taking the time to leave me your ratings and reviews. I've read all of them and they really do mean a lot. And new episodes, if you've enjoyed this, are out every month. And until then, you can find us on Insta at Beastly History. I'll see you next time. Keep being beastly.